Cello from the Philosophy Department, and tonight we turn our attention to issues associated with institutional accreditation. Judith Eaton, maybe some of you know her, she's the president of the Council of Higher Education Accreditation, has reminded us that accreditation reflects three core values of higher education, all essential to academic quality, namely institutional autonomy, academic freedom, and peer and professional review. To the extent that the demands of the accreditation process are at odds with these core academic values, they endanger the traditional role of the faculty. Tonight, Dr. Steve Gelb from Souls will help us explore the question of what the demands of accreditation mean to faculty members who attempt to meet them. Our presentation has been made possible by the generosity of the Values Institute, which is directed by Dr. Michelle Greer. The Philosophy Department is also co-sponsoring this event, and also the University of San Diego chapter of the American Association of University Professors. Steve Gelb earned his PhD in educational psychology in 1984 at the University of Washington, and subsequently spent a year as a postdoc studying behavior genetics, including running experiments on fruit flies in a comparative psychology laboratory at the University of Illinois at Champaign-Urbana. He spent 2 years on the faculty at York University in Toronto before coming to the University of San Diego in 1989. He served as Associate Dean in Souls for several years and was acting dean during Dean Cordero's sabbatical. He has been awarded 2 university professorships, once for career recognition and once for an exemplary project serving the Hmong community in Linda Vista. Steve's research has been in the area of intellectual history, specifically the influence of the Darwinian Revolution on 19th and early 20th century attitudes toward and treatment of people with disabilities. His work has appeared in the American Educational Research Journal, Journal of the History of the Behavioral Sciences, History of Education Quarterly, Disability Studies Quarterly, as well as in many other places. More recently, his interests have focused on community work in peace and conflict resolution. Steve is a credentialed mediator who serves on the Community Mediation Panel of the National Conflict Resolution Center. He has facilitated workshops on dialogue for the Public Conversations Project and is involved with the Alternatives to Violence Project in facilitating workshops with inmates in state prisons. He is a board member of the Peace and Justice Studies Association and a member of the Alternatives to Violence California Steering Committee. At USD, he co-founded a graduate peace education certificate program in collaboration with the School of Peace Studies. Steve's talk tonight is based upon years of experience in program evaluation and accreditation. As Associate Dean in Souls, he was the accreditation coordinator for its most recent national and state teacher education accreditation reviews. Steve was a member of the USD WASC steering committee for the review previous to the last one. He has served on a visiting accreditation team evaluating another university and has been a paid consultant evaluating programs for the Escondido School District, the Catholic Charities East County Office, and recently Universidad CETYS in Tijuana. His presentation tonight is called Silence of the Lambs, Accreditation and the Erosion of Faculty Morale and Integrity. So please help me welcome Dr. Stephen Gelb.
Good evening, everybody. I'm very grateful for this opportunity to talk about this topic. I want to thank the Values Institute for inviting me to do this, and I thank all of you for being here so we can explore this together. Several years ago, in a room just down the hall, I, with my colleague Paula Christ and the Dean of Education and an Associate Provost and the faculty and department chairs all sat in a state of high anxiety as we awaited the word from the accreditation team that had been visiting with us and which culminated a process of about 2 years of work on our part. And as we sat there and they came up to the front and gave us good news, we all began to exhale and we felt a great sense of relief. But I did not experience a feeling of pride nor satisfaction. Rather, I felt a feeling of shame and confusion. And it took me a long time to reflect on that experience and to make sense of it. And it wasn't actually until I had a sabbatical and could think about what had happened and what I had done and who I had become that things began to become more clear to me. I would say that that experience was the most disappointing and disillusioning experience I've had in my professional career of almost 3 decades. When I step back, I came to see the frantic activity that I had been involved in as a deflection of time, money, and energy from more meaningful work. And especially, I had seen that frantic activity as devoid of any serious intellectual substance. I had an intense close-up view as accreditation coordinator of higher education accountability. I reached the sad conclusion that much of the massive data collection that we had been engaged in really served the function of a ritual, a ceremonial purpose rather than a functional purpose. I was left with questions about the costs of accreditation in faculty productivity and morale, as well as many regrets about my own role and my own behavior. I think, like many faculty members, I hadn't looked at accreditation closely, but had kind of regarded it from the corner of my eye as something that was a taken for granted and required part of the academic landscape. But I'm now convinced that its growing influence is not only of dubious value and dubious benefit for educational improvement, but an actual threat to the vitality and potential creativity of faculty life and education itself. Accreditation agencies, of course, speak in a discourse of efficiency and analysis. An engineering faculty member from the University of Wisconsin commented, "To question an approach that ostensibly is learning-centered rather than teaching-centered, objective rather than subjective, modern rather than old-fashioned, results-based rather than intention-based, is to risk coming down on the side of fuzzy, lax, lazy, and muddled." And yet, he concluded that there is a great deal of potential nonsense in what has been sold as a nonsense-free approach due to the misapplication of a manufacturing model to education. He argued, manufacturers control what is manufactured in a way that educators cannot control and should not control what is learned, concluding that the idea, and remember he's speaking about engineering programs, that the idea that engineering programs are either effective or ineffective processes that stamp, mill, shape, and polish raw material into either high or low quality finished goods is just a bad way of looking at it for both educators and students. Similarly, Edler in 2004 noted that because teaching and learning are not business activities, the misapplication of the corporate assessment model turns learning into a product, and everything else, especially teaching, a means of production. Thus, systems of education management become more important than education itself, and the alignment of teaching with predetermined outcomes is seen as the most important measure of quality in teaching. But the measurement of learning products in higher education is fraught with difficulties that manufacturers of actual products like brakes or motors don't face. And the most important of these, in my view, is that it's not possible to measure the value of an educational program, let alone an institution, by measuring a relatively small number of learning outcomes. The demands for ever higher piles of data, I believe, are an attempt to mask the irredeemable flaw at the heart of the enterprise. Evidence here, evidence there. Yet 10 years after the continuous data-driven improvement model was introduced into higher education, no one is certain if it actually improves learning and teaching, or if programs are getting better. One review of health sector accreditation research concluded that the accreditation of a health program appears unrelated to professional performance. No distinction between the conduct of health professionals who trained or did not train in an accredited program could be distinguished in the first year. And counterintuitively, in the second year, the performance of those who trained in non-accredited programs was assessed to be better. I don't mean to argue that accreditation is entirely without benefit. The initial SOLES accreditation, and we use the acronym NCATE for that accrediting body, which has now shifted to a new acronym, just as WASC has shifted to a new acronym. But the initial accreditation was quite helpful in spite of its over-the-top demands. At that time, our faculty designed a conceptual framework for a program that really had none, and revised and connected courses that people were operating in complete isolation from one another. We really had no program to speak of. We just had a bunch of courses that we called a program. So these were good things. The downside was that we worked for many months to fill up an entire room with documents. This was before we had the online documents. And so we filled up an entire room from bottom to top with binder after binder of documents, most of which could not possibly have been read in the time that was available to the visiting team. The more recent accreditation, the one that I began my talk by discussing, was, in my view, a case study in the crazy-making side of accreditation. The examining team consisted of 16 people to examine a full-time faculty of 17 people. The accreditation procedures were complex enough that it was necessary for me and two colleagues to fly across the country and attend a 3-day conference where we learned such trivial yet accreditation crucial skills as how to upload and download files on the NCATE website, how to create an online document exhibition, how to integrate specialized program accreditation reports, and how to determine when a program would be called an advanced one or a beginning one or an initial one, according to the definition of the accrediting body. I also learned that one lucrative way to make a living in these hard economic times is as an accreditation guru, because there were several hired guns who were making presentations who appeared to be people who moved from school to school every couple of years, each time an accreditation review was coming up, because these were people who really knew how to read between the lines and exactly what to do to be successful with minimum muss and fuss. One of the features of accreditation work is that it conceals authority and silences faculty voice. Anyone who has written accreditation documents knows that it is a formulaic task. It usually begins, our unit meets standard 2, blah, 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 by doing this and by doing this. So the documents tend to be turgid in tone. However, although many faculty and administrators contribute to writing these documents, the final text has no author. And above all, it brooks no dissent. It is supposed to speak for everyone. The homogenized products that are churned out conform to accreditation discourse, so that across campuses everywhere, all courses will increase critical thinking. All courses will increase awareness and appreciation of diversity. All courses will deepen students' understanding and ability to apply the subject matter that they're studying. So accreditation's impersonal appeal to expertise centralizes authority, but it does so in an essentially anonymous fashion that makes it hard to locate. There's no one seemingly in charge, but everyone is obligated to fall into line. I found that accreditation work was deeply anti-intellectual. Our communication with NCATE and the state team consisted of countless phone calls, countless email messages, and there is not a single one that I can recall that treated any issue of intellectual substance. All of them treated technical matters regarding the review. The technical discourse increasingly encroached on meetings that I was a part of, as we turned from discussions of what I consider to be substance towards a focus on procedural compliance. We discovered that, as others had, that with an emphasis on technical alignment and reporting accountability, there is little space for intellectual discourse. To their credit, accreditation agencies advocate that units should engage in a reflective and dialogic process in preparing for reviews. In reality, though, the demands for data exhibits and the frantic work required to create them leaves little room for anything else. One faculty member reported that meetings became tedious and lifeless. Ongoing conversations about substance were abandoned, and faculty who persisted in raising such issues, as opposed to procedural ones, were likely to be silenced. When a faculty member named Kapler asked, to what extent and in what ways are we providing feedback to NCATE about its standards and accreditation system, she was told she was a non-team player. Alan Luke wrote that there is a silencing process that goes on in institutions pushing neoliberal accountability. The stated or unstated implication that critique is non-productive and unscientific, that foundational questions are irrelevant to the real politic of systems reform, so that the normative, the ethical, the cultural matters of value have quietly slipped out of policy discussion. And Kapler reported that the overall effect of NCATE's imposition into our university and the division's reaction to it was, for me, an uncomfortable feeling of being an automaton, a mechanical thing that does the bidding of the higher-ups without question or resistance. When accreditors said things in the course of the accreditation that made no sense to me, and this happened fairly frequently, I kept it to myself, and my colleagues kept it to themselves as well. We discussed it with one another. We rolled eyes as crazy requests were made. But we felt that we were walking on eggshells. We did not want to offend the accrediting agency. One of the wrinkles in our own accreditation, we had chosen what was called an alternative accreditation path. But nothing felt alternative about it. We were asked to jump through the same hoops as usual. And then shortly before the visit, we were told that the evaluation of the alternative projects we were working on wouldn't even affect the outcome of the accreditation review. We were really beside ourselves by feeling like it had been a bait and switch by the accreditation agency. We invested considerable time and energy into doing something that they now told us didn't matter. But, and this is the silence of the lambs, we did not bring this directly to the accreditation group. We sucked it up like quiet, good, compliant faculty, and we continue to pile up the exhibits and the data for them to look at. Outwardly, I maintain the posture of smiling, ingratiating accreditation coordinator, except the times when I lost my temper, unfortunately, with the people I was working with because I was under so much stress. I tread lightly to avoid provoking the retribution I feared might follow an honest expression of my dismay. Even when we were asked to give feedback to NCATE and the state, I didn't provide it because we were asked to provide it at a time before the final report came out. And I didn't have any trust that if I were honest with them and told them exactly how absurd I thought the whole thing had been and what a sham, something bad might happen to all the unit, and I didn't want to take that responsibility to make it bad for other people. And I want to point out that, and the people who know me know that I often get in trouble by speaking when I probably shouldn't, in some cases. So I'm not reticent. So this was not in character for me. And I point this out not to blame myself, but I think to point out how accreditation shapes our behavior, what it does to us, without us realizing it. We were silent. I feel like we had been actually somewhat abused by our accreditors in that review, but we didn't speak back to them. One of the aspects that I found most frustrating about accreditation is what I call procedural display. I think there are many things that we're asked to do in accreditation that are kind of like the little man behind the curtain speaking with a big voice to impress everybody, to let us know that something really, really important is going on. So 6 months before the team came to visit, we were required to post a notice of the upcoming review on our website and invite the public to submit third-party comments about our programs to the accrediting agency. A senior member of the accrediting body told me that, by and large, nobody ever made a comment. But it sure made it seem like something really big and important was about to happen. Closer to the visit, we had the pre-visit. So there's the visit and then there's the pre-visit, which is actually a visit. And the pre-visit is to arrange the actual visit. So we had 4 people come from the accreditation team to talk with us and arrange how the visit would go. And as luck would have it, the Thursday night that the team arrived was when we had a blackout in San Diego. So we were in a state of great anxiety the next morning because we couldn't contact them. We were starting late. The university was closed, but we were able to still meet with them. But our anxiety was, are we going to be able to accomplish everything that needs to be done? After all, these people have flown here at expense to spend the day with us, and we only have a few hours now. I should mention also that although the state was in the midst of a severe budget crisis, government of California paid for 3 people to come down and be part of this, and we paid for the head of the accreditation team to come from USD. But to our great surprise, there was nothing of substance to accomplish. The visitors had on their agenda only procedural matters that could have been handled by phone or over the internet. We discussed things like the interview schedules, the off-site visit schedule. Each team, there were 2 teams, and they each demanded a separate schedule. That required us to create 3 schedules, one for each team and one for us, so we knew what the heck was going on. Then during the actual visit, each of the teams decided to use our 3rd integrated schedule anyway. The pre-visit visitors, high on their list of concerns was to have document shredders available and confidential meeting rooms both in their hotels and on campus. The pre-visit protocol also required a meeting with the provost. And so I took the 3 visitors to a meeting with Julie Sullivan, who was the provost at that time. But it turned out there was no agenda for the meeting. It was all small talk and jocularity. And at the end of it, Julie and I looked at each other in dismay, like, why was this happening? So the purpose of the pre-visit appeared to be purely procedural display. My friend Christian Michel, who's here tonight and who teaches Spanish in high school, gave me another example of what I think of procedural display. For WASC visits at high schools, all teachers are required to place a box under their desks filled with a range of student assignments that they've divided into categories of below average, average, and exemplary or above average. The boxes in each classroom, put together a great effort by the teachers, suggest the seriousness and the thoroughness of the review. But because Christian is a critic of such reviews and a bit of a rebel, on 2 different occasions for 2 different WASC visits, he left the boxes empty, and no one was the wiser. On another level, accreditation, while certainly arduous and consuming tons of energy and time, is not rocket science, and is really fairly straightforward. It's also slanted towards success, and it could even be faulted for not being critical enough. In reality, large institutions would not tolerate accreditation agencies that would be genuinely disruptive of how they operate. So accreditation serves a conservative function. A glaring example is the American Correctional Association, the national organization that accredits prisons. Here is what the ACA says about itself. Perhaps ACA's greatest influence has been the development of national standards and the accreditation process. ACA standards address services, programs, and operations essential to effective correctional management. Through accreditation, an agency is able to maintain a balance between protecting the public and providing an environment that safeguards the life, health, and safety of both staff and offenders. Standards set by ACA reflect practical, up-to-date policies and procedures and function as a management tool for 1,500 correctional agencies in the United States. Yet, some of California's most notorious prisons, including Pelican Bay, where more than 500 prisoners have lived in solitary confinement for 10 years, and 80 for more than 20 years. In fact, Amnesty International and the United Nations have written letters to California about the way we treat prisoners, has recently posted their successful ACA accreditation on their website. And by 2017, all of California's notorious state prisons will be accredited. Now, it may seem a stretch and unfair to compare prison accreditation with university accreditation, but they have in common that their reviews are not set up for discovery, but rather for confirmation of the good faith institutions want to put forward. For teacher education, which is the area that I know best, programs get to choose the graduates, employers, field supervisors, adjunct faculty, and field sites the team will interview or visit. Naturally, they exclude disgruntled individuals and sites that wouldn't reflect well on them. Institutions, as we did, then orient their hand-picked participants to the accreditation process. They gave them information about the kinds of questions they might be asked, and summaries of program talking points clothed in accreditation lingo. Current students, faculty, and administrators are primed the same way. And these folks have a stake in a positive outcome, and are often grouped to meet examiners so that it's even less likely that someone would voice a criticism and risk being seen as disloyal. So the accreditation visit is a carefully orchestrated affair that will show off the institution in the best light possible, and is planned over years. If accreditation were actually really serious, agencies would provide programs to provide them with comprehensive lists of potential interviewees, and then randomly and privately arrange to speak with them at unannounced intervals. They might also show up as Child Protective Services does for the state licensing agency for childcare. They want to see what it looks like on any given day, so they show up unannounced to see how the children are being cared for. Because accreditation teams are trained to assimilate program information to a pre-existing and standardized template, they aren't attuned to program strengths or weaknesses that aren't imagined within the template they come with. And that's one of the reasons why I believe the relationship between accreditation review and program quality is at best tangential. Sol's programs feature some really remarkable and creative features that didn't get noted in our report because the rubrics of the examiners didn't have a place for them. They just didn't exist in the universe of concerns that they were looking for. Then too, the process of accreditation follows a binary logic in which standards are met or not met, or sometimes only partially met. So examiners seek evidence that they seek evidence to either say the standard has been met or not, but the quality of the evidence, in my experience, is actually secondary to the fact of its existence. And the evidence itself is not subject to critical evaluation. Programs can succeed through the formula of carefully and explicitly mapping student learning outcomes into their syllabi, into their assessments, and then making some changes based on aggregating these assessments at the program level. And those changes can be quite banal. They can be things like, we added another book for people to read in this area because we felt the students were not properly prepared. And that will fly. Accreditation veterans, the cognoscenti of the accreditation world, know that the process rewards clarity, consistency, specificity, and comprehensiveness over intellectual rigor. And they are wise enough to recommend that we limit the number and difficulty of the learning outcomes to shoot for, because anything else doesn't give us, you get no points for difficulty in accreditation. You get only points for aligning everything in a row. So the accreditation discourse of standards, data, assessment, and continuous improvement suggests a depth and a rigor that belies the clerical and anti-intellectual nature of the actual work. Faculty members often have a great deal of difficulty shoehorning their minds into the straitjacket of accreditation thinking, the accreditation's box of compliance. A scholar named Taubman wrote of the tears spilled by a well-respected scholar of women's history because she couldn't figure out how to color-code her syllabi or aggregate the data for NCAPE. And I've seen the same thing. I've seen some of my most capable colleagues reduced to absolutely helpless frustration as they sought to create a matrix for NCAPE, or to understand what was required of them to create an exhibit and write about it in the language that was expected by the accreditation agency. So with quantity rather than quality as the measure of success, there are a daunting number of hoops to jump through. I'll just mention a couple of the ones that I thought were really demoralizing. The first one was the state of California has preconditions. This means there are certain things you have to prove to them before you can even ask for their approval for accreditation. And the first one is you have to prove that you're an accredited university. Even though they could look that up on the internet in a second. So you have to find some documentation somewhere and hand it to them. One of the things I thought was discouraging from NCAPE was the requirement that they receive a copy of our policy for handling student complaints, as well as a sample of those complaints and how we handle them. I actually turned those into them. It took, okay, there's nothing to hide. We do a great job of handling complaints and being fair. But for some reason, they lost what I'd handed into them. So during the visit, as they were checking their stuff, they said, where's your complaints, and you're handling the complaints? So I printed them out and brought them in, and I gave them to the team leader. And he glanced at them, I would say, for 15 seconds, and then put them aside and checked it off. And that was frustrating. But I don't want to demonize the examiners and the people involved in this, because they are good people doing what they think is right and doing the best that they can. And the reality is that there is too much evidence required for them to do much more than notice presence or absence. I mean, we could barely keep track of all the stuff we put up on the internet, in these exhibits. There was so much stuff, and the question we most frequently got from the examining team was, where can I find such and such? And then we would all hunt for it and locate it. So along with every other institution that goes through this process, we constructed, at an enormous cost in time, energy, money, and emotional health, an accreditation website consisting of hundreds of documents and I think thousands of pages. Then, as the visit drew near, the state team made a new request asking us to write summaries of our programs, our credential programs. So we presumed that the reviewers were drowning in the material that they required us to submit, and they had neither time nor energy to make sense of it. And in fairness, I don't think anybody can. There's just too much. So where does this leave me? I've been thinking about this a lot over the last few years, which is one reason I'm so happy to have this opportunity to talk about this and also get responses and criticisms and other thoughts from those of you who are here. But it appears to me that we need to have a really different conversation than the one that we're having or not having at all. One that engages with, rather than ignores, disciplinary advances in methodology.